My daughter left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm done with you. This house is sold. Pack your things and make room for real people." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I flipped the paper over and wrote just 2 words. Hours later, my phone exploded with 49 missed calls, voicemails, apologies, panic. But by then, the damage was done, because those 2 words weren't a reply. They were a warning. Hello everyone, before we continue, comment below and tell me where you're watching from so I know you're here with me. And a quick heads up, this story contains some fictional elements used for storytelling and learning purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message behind it is meant to be useful and meaningful. The Chicago wind does not care if you have just spent 4 hours with a needle in your arm, pumping poison into your veins to kill the cancer before it kills you. It cuts right through your coat and settles in your bones. I stepped out of the yellow taxi in front of my home on Dearborn Street, and the cold hit me like a physical blow. I am 73 years old, and I have lived in this city all my life, but that wind never gets any warmer, especially when you are standing on the sidewalk, shivering from chemotherapy side effects. The taxi driver asked if I needed help getting to the door, but I waved him off. I am Gerald Sullivan. I built half the skyline in this neighborhood, and I do not need help walking up the steps of the house I bought with cash 30 years ago. The house is a classic brownstone worth $1.8 million in today's market, but to me it was just the place where I raised my family and where I watched my wife Patricia take her last breath. It was my sanctuary. Or at least I thought it was, until I tried to put my key in the lock. The metal scraped against metal, but the cylinder would not turn. I frowned and jiggled it, thinking maybe the cold had frozen the mechanism, but my hands were shaking so bad it was hard to tell. I tried again. Nothing. I took a step back and looked at the heavy oak door. I had refinished that door myself, stripping away layers of old paint to reveal the beautiful wood grain underneath. I knew every inch of this house because I had restored it with my own sweat and blood. Then I looked at the keypad above the handle, the smart lock I had installed for convenience. I punched in my code, 4 digits I had used for 10 years. The little light blinked red. Access denied. I punched it in again, slower this time, forcing my trembling fingers to be precise. Red light. Access denied. A knot of panic started to form in my stomach right next to the nausea from the chemo. I was freezing. My body felt like it was made of lead, and I needed to use the bathroom desperately. I pressed the doorbell. I could hear the chime echo inside, deep and familiar. I waited. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, and then I started pounding on the wood with my fist. "Madison, open the door," I shouted. My voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. "It is freezing out here. Open the damn door." I saw the curtain on the front window twitch. Someone was watching me. A moment later, I heard the heavy deadbolt slide back, but the door only opened a crack, stopping abruptly as the security chain caught. My daughter Madison peered out through the gap. She was 38 years old and wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. Her face was perfectly made up, but her eyes were cold, colder than the wind biting at my neck. "Dad," she said. Her tone was flat, impatient, like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting her dinner. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated incredulously. "I live here, Madison. I just got back from the clinic." "Let me in. I need to sit down. I need the bathroom." She did not move to undo the chain. In fact, she leaned her weight against the door as if to make sure I could not push my way in. "You cannot come in," she said simply. "We are busy." "Busy?" I coughed, and the spasm sent a sharp pain through my chest. "Madison, stop playing games. I am sick. I am tired. Open this door before I freeze to death on my own porch." "You are not going to freeze," she said, rolling her eyes. "And you do not live here anymore." Not really. We talked about this. We never talked about anything like this. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The medication was making my head spin. I felt like I was in a nightmare. What are you talking about? The house is sold, Dad, she said. Her voice was so casual it was terrifying. Brandon and I accepted an offer this morning. The new owners want immediate possession. We are packing up. You are just going to be in the way. Sold, I whispered. You cannot sell my house. It is my house. Technically, she smirked a little, and that expression chilled me more than the snow falling around us. You signed the power of attorney, remember? You said you wanted us to handle your affairs while you focused on getting better. Well, we are handling them. This house is too big for you. It is a burden. We are liquidating it. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. I had signed papers, yes, before the surgery last month. I trusted her. She was my only child. I thought she was helping me pay bills and manage the insurance. I never imagined she would use it to evict me. Let me in, Madison, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. I need to use the bathroom. Now. No, she said. If I let you in, you will just refuse to leave and make a scene. I do not have time for your drama today, Dad. Brandon and I have a celebration dinner planned. Through the crack in the door behind her shoulder, I saw movement in the hallway. It was Brandon, my son-in-law. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a glass of red wine. My red wine, a vintage I had been saving for my 75th birthday. He looked at the door, saw me standing there, shivering and turning gray. And he did not come to help. He just took a sip of wine and turned away, walking back toward the living room, where a fire was roaring in the fireplace. The fireplace I built. The rage that surged through me was the only thing keeping me warm. You are stealing my house, I said. We are managing your assets, she corrected sharply. And honestly, Dad, you should be grateful. We found a place for you, Sunset Haven. It is affordable and they deal with people in your condition. Sunset Haven. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the dying on the south side, a place that smelled of urine and bleach where they sedated the residents to keep them quiet. She was not managing my assets. She was throwing me away. Please, I said, and I hated myself for begging, but my bladder was screaming and my legs were giving out. Just let me use the toilet. Then I will go. I promise. Madison looked at me. She looked at her father, a man who had paid for her college, who had walked her down the aisle, who had bought her first car. She looked at me shivering and broken. Wait here, she said. She closed the door. I thought she was undoing the chain. I thought maybe there was a shred of humanity left in her. I stood there wiping snow off my face, waiting for the click of the lock. But the door did not open. Instead, I heard rustling. Then the door opened again, just a crack. Here, she said. She shoved something through the gap. It was a heavy black plastic trash bag. It hit my chest and fell onto the snowy porch with a thud. What is this? I asked, staring at the bag. Your clothes, she said, and that picture of Mom you keep on the nightstand. The rest of the stuff goes to the estate sale tomorrow. And then she slapped a sticky note onto the front of the door, right at my eye level. It was bright neon yellow. Read it, she said, and then get off my property before I call the police for trespassing. She slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I heard the lock beep as she rearmed the security system. I stood there alone. The silence of the street was deafening. I looked at the yellow note. In her rushed handwriting it said, I am sick of you, you useless old man. This house is sold. Pack your things and welcome to the trash heap. I should have cried. A normal father would have cried. To be betrayed by your own flesh and blood, to be left out in sub-zero temperatures with cancer, eating your insides and your own home locked against you, it is enough to break anyone. But I did not cry. The tears froze before they could form. Instead, something inside me snapped back into place. It was the part of me that had survived Vietnam. The part of me that had survived the recession of 2008. The part of me that had built a construction empire from a single toolbox. I looked down at the black trash bag. My life, my dignity, stuffed in plastic. I bent down and picked it up. My joints screamed in protest, but I forced them to work. I was not going to die on this porch. I was not going to give her that satisfaction. I turned to leave, but then I saw it. Madison's brand new Range Rover parked in the driveway. It was gleaming white, spotless. A gift I had helped her with the down payment for just last Christmas. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed against my pill bottles, but that was not what I was looking for. I found it. My black industrial Sharpie. I never went anywhere without it. A habit from 40 years on job sites. I walked over to the Range Rover. The wind was howling now, blinding me with snow, but my hand was steady for the first time all day. I took the yellow sticky note off the door. I turned it over to the blank side. I pressed it against the driver's side window of her precious car. I wrote 2 words, just 2. Wrong move. I stuck the note to the glass right where she would see it the moment she stepped out to go to her fancy dinner. Then I threw the trash bag over my shoulder. It was heavy, but the anger made it light. I did not look back at the house. I did not look back at the warm glow of the windows or the smoke rising from the chimney. That was not my home anymore. It was a battlefield. I walked down the driveway and into the street. The snow was getting deeper, covering my tracks as I went. I needed to find a place to sleep. I needed to find a bathroom. But most of all, I needed a phone that worked and a lawyer who was hungry. Madison thought she had thrown out the trash. She did not realize she had just lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite. I pulled my coat collar up against the biting wind and started walking toward the main road. The cold was brutal, but I hardly felt it. I was already planning my next step, and I knew one thing for certain. By the time I was done with them, they would wish they had let me freeze on that porch. The neon sign of the Motel 6 buzzed with an irritating hum that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing headache behind my eyes. It was situated just off the interstate, a place where 18-wheelers rumbled past, shaking the ground every few minutes. I had walked for nearly an hour through the slush and wind to get here, because I knew no one from my social circle would ever be caught dead in this part of town. My coat, usually a shield against the elements, now felt heavy and damp, weighing me down like a lead vest. I pushed open the glass door, and the smell of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner assaulted my nose immediately. Behind the plexiglass partition sat a young man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. He was scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look up as I approached the counter. I cleared my throat, trying to muster some of the authority I had commanded on construction sites for 40 years. "I need a room for the night," I said. My voice was raspy. The cold air had done a number on my throat, and the nausea from the chemo was coming in waves now, making the room spin slightly. $60 plus tax, the clerk said without making eye contact. ID and credit card. I reached into my inner pocket for my wallet. My hands were still shaking violently, partly from the cold and partly from the adrenaline crash of the confrontation at the house. I pulled out my Visa Infinite card. It was made of black metal, heavy and cold to the touch. A symbol of status. A card with a limit high enough to buy a small luxury car. I slid it under the partition. The clerk finally looked up, seeing the card, and then looking at my disheveled appearance. He probably thought I had stolen it. He took it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and swiped it through the machine. I waited for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, there was a harsh buzz. "Declined," the clerk said, sliding it back. "That is impossible," I said, my brow furrowing. "There is no limit on that card. Try it again. It must be the machine or the chip is wet from the snow." He sighed a long, exaggerated breath that told me I was wasting his time. He swiped it again. Harder this time. Buzz. Declined, he repeated. Do you have another form of payment or not? I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I pulled out my American Express Platinum. This was my backup, my emergency line. I handed it to him. This one will work, I said confidently, though a seed of doubt had begun to sprout in my chest. He inserted the chip. We waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Then the machine flashed a message that made my blood run cold. Pickup requested, he read from the screen. He looked at me with suspicion, now pulling the card back to his side of the counter. Sir, this card has been reported lost or stolen. I cannot give this back to you. I have to destroy it. Stolen, I stammered. I am Gerald Sullivan. That is my name on the card. Look at my ID. It does not matter what your ID says, the clerk said, reaching for a pair of scissors. The system says it is stolen. Do you have cash or are you leaving? I stared at him, watching as he cut my platinum card in half. My lifeline. Gone. I stepped back from the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Give me a minute, I said. I moved to the corner of the lobby near a vending machine that hummed almost as loudly as the sign outside. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were numb, making it hard to navigate the touch screen. I dialed the priority service number for my bank. Usually they pick up on the first ring for a client of my standing. Today I was put on hold. The elevator music played a cheerful tune that felt like a mockery of my situation. Finally, a woman answered. Gerald Sullivan accounts. This is Jennifer. How can I help you today, Mr. Sullivan? Jennifer. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am at a motel and my cards are being declined. One was just confiscated. What is going on with my account? I have been a client for 30 years. This is unacceptable. One moment, please let me check your file, she said. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then her voice returned, but the professional warmth was gone, replaced by a confused hesitation. Mr. Sullivan, I see here that a transfer was initiated this morning. A wire transfer for the full balance of your checking and savings accounts. $450,000. The accounts are currently at zero, and there is a flag on the credit cards reporting them as compromised. New cards were issued and expedited to your home address. I felt the room tilt. I grabbed the side of the vending machine to keep from falling over. Transferred, I whispered. By who? I did not authorize any transfer. I have been at the hospital all day. The notes here say the transaction was authorized by Madison Sullivan Dunn, she said. She provided the power of attorney documentation you filed last month. It is a general durable power of attorney, Mr. Sullivan. It gives her full access to all financial decisions. She stated that you were incapacitated due to medical reasons and that she needed to secure the funds. Incapacitated. The word hung in the air. She cleared the accounts, I asked, my voice barely audible. All of it. Yes, sir. The balance is zero, and since the cards were reported lost by the authorized representative, we cannot reactivate the old ones. The new ones will arrive at the registered address tomorrow morning. The registered address. My house. The house I was locked out of. Thank you, Jennifer, I said, and hung up before she could say anything else. I stood there staring at the reflection of a broken old man in the glass of the vending machine. This was not just a tantrum. This was not just a daughter being difficult. This was a demolition. I opened my wallet. I bypassed the empty slots where my credit cards used to be and looked at the cash compartment. I counted the bills. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, and a $20, $120. That was my net worth right now. The man who had built shopping malls and high-rises was reduced to 6 bills of currency. I walked back to the counter. The clerk was watching me, ready to kick me out. I did not say a word. I simply laid $60 on the counter. "Room," I said. He took the money, verified it with a marker to make sure it was not counterfeit, and tossed a plastic key card onto the counter. "Room 104, down the hall to the left. Checkout is at 11. No smoking." I took the key and walked down the hallway. The carpet was stained with years of neglect. The air smelled of mildew and despair. I found room 104 and swiped the card. The light turned green. I pushed open the door and stepped into a room that was smaller than my walk-in closet at home. There was a double bed with a polyester spread that had seen better days, a small desk, and a television that looked like it was from the 90s. I dropped the black trash bag onto the floor. It made a pathetic sound. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was lumpy and squeaked under my weight. I kept my coat on. The room was freezing, and the heating unit under the window rattled but produced no warmth. I closed my eyes and let my head fall into my hands. How had I been so blind? I thought back to the day in Dr. Evans' office. The diagnosis: stage 2 pancreatic cancer. Treatable but aggressive. I had been in shock. I had looked at Madison sitting next to me. She had covered her face with her hands and sobbed. "Oh, Daddy," she had cried. "What are we going to do?" I had reached out and patted her shoulder, trying to comfort her. I thought she was crying for me. I thought she was terrified of losing her father. I remember telling her not to worry. I remember telling her I would fight it. And then a few days later, she had brought the papers. "Just in case something happens during the surgery, Dad," she had said, her eyes red and puffy. "You do not want the state freezing your assets if you are in a coma. Let me handle the bills. Let me protect your legacy while you focus on healing." I had signed. I did not even read the fine print. I signed because she was my little girl. I signed because I was scared of dying, and I wanted to believe that someone had my back. But she had not been crying for me. I realized that now with a clarity that cut sharper than a knife. She had been crying because she thought the cancer might take too long. She wanted the money now. She saw an opportunity. A weak old man distracted by his own mortality. She had played the part of the grieving daughter perfectly, all while waiting for the moment to strike. She waited until the chemo started. She waited until I was at my weakest physically. She knew I would be too sick to fight back immediately. She knew the drugs would make me confused and tired. She timed it perfectly. The locks changed. The accounts drained. The cards canceled. It was a surgical strike. I looked at my hands. They were calloused and wrinkled. These hands had laid bricks. They had framed walls. They had signed contracts worth millions. And now they were shaking, holding nothing but air. The betrayal burned in my chest, hotter than the cancer. It was a physical pain. My own daughter. The girl I had taught to ride a bike. The woman I had walked down the aisle to that loser Brandon. They had planned this together. They had sat at my dining table, eating my food, drinking my wine, laughing at my jokes, all while plotting to leave me destitute in the dead of winter. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. There was a large water stain in the corner, shaped vaguely like a skull. The wind howled outside, rattling the thin window pane. I could picture them right now in my warm living room. Brandon probably toasting with my wine. Madison probably online shopping with my money. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over because they had taken my pieces off the board. But they forgot who taught them how to play. They saw an old man. They saw a cancer patient. They saw a victim. They did not see Gerald Sullivan. They did not see the man who had come back from bankruptcy in the 80s when everyone said he was finished. They did not see the man who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of success he had. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt from the motel. I smoothed it out on the nightstand. $120 minus 60. I had $60 left to my name. $60 and a brain that was finally waking up from the fog of sentimentality. I am not going to die here, I whispered to the empty room. My voice was steady now. The shaking had stopped. I rolled onto my side, pulling my coat tighter around me as the room temperature dropped. I stared at the door. Tomorrow I would have nothing. No home, no car, no money. But I had something they did not account for. I had nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man on earth. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the trucks rumble by, and I made a promise to the moldy ceiling above me. There will be no funeral for Gerald Sullivan in a state-run facility. I am not going to fade away in some warehouse for the forgotten. But there will be an eviction. There will be a reckoning. Someone is going to end up on the street with nothing but the clothes on their back. And it is not going to be me. The morning sun did not bring warmth to Chicago. It only brought a harsh gray light that exposed the grime on the windows of the diner where I sat waiting. My phone had buzzed at 6 in the morning with a text from Madison that was so sickeningly sweet it almost made me vomit. Daddy let us meet for breakfast at Lou's Diner on 5th. I want to explain everything and make sure you are okay. Love you. Love. That word looked alien on the screen, coming from the same person who had left me to freeze on a porch less than 24 hours ago. I was sitting in a booth with cracked red vinyl upholstery, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber and cost $2. It was all I could afford to waste. My stomach was still churning from the chemotherapy and the hunger, but I knew I had to keep my wits sharp. I watched the door. At 8:15, exactly, the bell above the entrance jingled and they walked in. Madison was wearing a beige trench coat that was belted tightly at the waist and oversized sunglasses that she did not take off immediately. Behind her trailed Brandon. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week despite his expensive grooming. He was wearing a suit that was too blue and too tight, the kind that real estate agents wear when they are trying to convince you they are successful. But what caught my eye immediately, what made my blood boil in my veins, was the glint of steel and ceramic on his left wrist. As they slid into the booth opposite me, Brandon adjusted his cuffs, and there it was, a Rolex Daytona with a white dial. I know watches. I have bought enough of them for business partners over the years. That watch costs $40,000 on the gray market. $40,000 on the wrist of a man who claimed he could not pay his own mortgage last year. A man who was currently living in my house and drinking my wine. I looked down at my own hands resting on the sticky table. My watch was gone, having been left on the dresser at home, a vintage Patek Philippe that was probably already in a pawnshop bag somewhere. Daddy, Madison said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her palms were warm and soft, a stark contrast to the coldness in her eyes when she took off her glasses. You look terrible. Have you been taking your meds? I pulled my hand away slowly. I am fine, Madison, I said, my voice raspy. I am just tired. You said you wanted to explain. She sighed, the sound of a martyr carrying the weight of the world. We were so worried about you last night, she lied smoothly. But we had to be tough. It is the only way to get you to accept reality. You are sick, Dad. Sicker than you want to admit. The doctors told us the cancer is spreading faster than expected. You need full-time care. Professional care. I stared at her. My oncologist had told me the exact opposite 2 days ago. He said the tumor was shrinking. She was lying to my face, using my own mortality as a bargaining chip. So that is why you changed the locks, I asked, keeping my expression vacant and confused. That is why you took my money. It is for your own protection, Brandon chimed in. His voice was jittery, and he kept looking out the window at the parking lot. We liquidated the accounts to secure a spot for you at Sunset Haven. It is a top-tier facility, Dad. But it is expensive. We had to move fast. Sunset Haven. I repeated slowly, testing the words. You sold my house for Sunset Haven. We have an interested buyer, Madison said, leaning in, her eyes wide with fake sincerity. A cash offer, Dad. It is a miracle, really. But we need to close the deal today to get the funds to pay for your room. If we wait, we might lose the spot, and then where would you be? We are doing this for you. We are selling our inheritance to make sure you are comfortable in your final days. She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a folder. She didn't open it fully. She just slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was dense with legal jargon, but the title was clear enough to me even without my reading glasses. Consent to sale and waiver of rights. Just sign here, Dad, she said, uncapping a pen and pressing it into my hand. This just tells the lawyers that you agree with the plan, that you want us to take care of you. Once you sign this, we can take you to the facility and get you settled in a nice warm room. No more motels, no more cold. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Brandon. He was not looking at me. He had his phone on the table face up, and he was staring at it with an intensity that was almost manic. His leg was bouncing up and down under the table, shaking the booth. Is something wrong, Brandon? I asked, letting my voice quaver like a senile old man. You seem nervous. He snapped his head up. What? No. I am just busy. I have meetings. Just sign the paper, Gerald, so we can go. I looked back down at the document. I feigned difficulty holding the pen, letting it slip through my fingers once before gripping it awkwardly. I needed time. I needed to see what was making him sweat in an air-conditioned diner. I do not know, I mumbled, playing the part of the confused geriatric. It is my house. I built the fireplace. Patricia loved that fireplace. Madison's jaw tightened. Mom is dead, Dad, she said, her voice losing some of its sweetness. And you are going to be dead too if you do not let us help you. Stop being stubborn. Think about your legacy. Do you want to die alone in a Motel 6, or do you want to be taken care of? While she was berating me, Brandon's phone lit up. A text message. It was short. The font was large because he had the settings magnified. I have excellent peripheral vision, a skill honed from years of watching for safety hazards on construction sites. The message was from a number saved only as the Turk. It read, Friday is the deadline. I am not patient. 500K or you break. I froze internally. The Turk, I knew that name. Everyone in Chicago construction knew that name. He was not a banker. He was not a legitimate lender. He was a loan shark who operated out of the back of a strip club on the West Side. He lent money to gamblers and desperate idiots who could not get approved by a bank. And if you did not pay him back, he did not send a collection agency. He sent men with baseball bats. Suddenly, the Rolex made sense. The desperation made sense. The rushed sale of a $1.8 million home for a quick cash injection made sense. Brandon had not just failed at business. He had gambled. He had borrowed from the devil, and now the devil was coming to collect. They were not selling my house to pay for my care. They were selling my house to save Brandon's kneecaps. I looked at Madison. Did she know? The desperation in her eyes told me she did. She was willing to throw her own father into a warehouse to die just to cover her husband's gambling debts. Dad signed the paper, she hissed, pushing the document closer. Now. I took a deep breath. I let my hand shake visibly. I lowered the pen to the paper. Okay, I said softly. Okay. I want to be safe. I pressed the pen to the signature line. But I did not sign Gerald Sullivan. Not the way I signed my checks. Not the way I signed the deed to the house 30 years ago. My real signature has a distinctive loop on the G and a sharp underline beneath the whole name. It is muscle memory. Instead, I let my hand wobble. I wrote a jagged, messy scrawl that barely resembled my name. I missed the line slightly. To the untrained eye, it looked like the signature of a weak, dying man. But to a forensic handwriting expert or a judge, it would look like exactly what it was. A signature made under duress or by a person who was not of sound mind. Or better yet, simply a forgery that did not match the specimen on file. There I whispered, dropping the pen. "Is that okay?" Brandon snatched the paper before the ink was even dry. He stared at it, and a grin broke across his face that was pure predatory relief. "Perfect," he said. "That is perfect." He shoved the paper into his briefcase and stood up immediately. "We have to go," he said to Madison, checking his watch again. "The title company is waiting." Madison stood up too. She looked at me, and for a second, just a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of guilt. But she crushed it instantly. "Finish your coffee, Dad," she said. "We will come pick you up at the motel tonight to take you to the home. Pack your things." She did not hug me this time. She did not even say goodbye. They turned and walked out of the diner, walking fast, almost running toward her Range Rover. They looked like a power couple closing a big deal. High heels clicking, expensive suits rustling. I watched them go. I watched Brandon pull his phone out as soon as he hit the sidewalk, probably texting the Turk that the money was coming. I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold now, but I drank it anyway. The bitterness was grounding. They thought they had won. They thought they had just secured $1 million payday. They thought I was a confused old man who just signed away his life because he was afraid of the cold. I pulled a $20 bill from my pocket, one of the few I had left, and placed it on the table. A generous tip for a $2 coffee, but I felt generous. I felt alive. I stood up and buttoned my coat. The nausea was gone. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were not just bad children. They were criminals. And they were stupid criminals. They had just involved a violent criminal organization in their family affairs. I walked to the door and pushed it open. The wind hit me again, but this time I did not shiver. I smelled the exhaust from the trucks on the highway. I smelled the grease from the kitchen. But mostly, I smelled fear. I knew that smell. I had smelled it on men before they fell from high beams. I had smelled it on competitors right before they went bankrupt. Brandon was terrified. And he should be. But not of the Turk. He should be afraid of me. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and turned in the opposite direction of the motel. I was not going back to room 104. I had a phone call to make to a lawyer who I knew hated bullies as much as I did. "You are playing with the big boys now, Brandon," I whispered to the empty street. "And you just folded your hand." The office of Jenkins and Associates was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower on Wacker Drive overlooking the river. It was a world away from the grime of the Motel 6 and the grease of the diner. Here the air smelled of expensive mahogany polish and fresh espresso. I walked past the receptionist who looked ready to call security on the disheveled old man standing in her lobby until Sarah Jenkins herself burst out of the conference room. "Sarah is the daughter of my best friend from the Army, a man who took a bullet meant for me in 1971. I paid for her law school tuition anonymously, though I suspect she always knew. She is 32 years old, sharp as a tack, and has a tolerance for nonsense that is lower than mine. When she saw me standing there in my wrinkled coat with dark circles under my eyes, she did not say a word. She just grabbed my arm and pulled me into her corner office, slamming the door shut and blinding the windows with a touch of a button. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the leather chair opposite her desk. She poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and shoved it into my hand. "You look like hell, Uncle Jerry. I thought you were recovering at home. Why are you here looking like a homeless person?" I drank the water in one gulp. "I am homeless, Sarah," I said, placing the glass down on her pristine desk. Madison kicked me out. She changed the locks, she drained the accounts, and she is selling the house. Sarah stopped moving. She stood perfectly still behind her desk, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. She did not ask if I was joking. She knows Madison. She knows Brandon. She knows that sharks do not change their nature just because they are related to you. She sat down slowly and opened her laptop. Tell me everything, she said, and do not leave out a single detail. I told her. I told her about the freezing porch, the trash bag the night at the motel, and the meeting at the diner. I told her about the power of attorney I signed when I was scared of the surgery. I told her about the Rolex and the text message from the Turk. When I finished, Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she started typing. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a violence that matched the anger radiating off her. "Give me a minute," she muttered. "I am pulling up the Cook County Recorder of Deeds database. If they are selling the house, there has to be a paper trail. You cannot just sell a property overnight without filing something, especially if the owner is not the one signing the listing agreement." I watched her face as she scrolled through the records. The blue light from the screen illuminated her features, which were usually calm and composed, but were now twisted in disbelief. "Found it," she whispered. Her voice was ice cold. "Oh, that little witch. She actually did it." "What did you find?" I asked, leaning forward, though the pain in my back protested the movement. She turned the monitor around so I could see. It was a digital copy of a document filed just 4 days ago. The header read, "Quitclaim deed." "She did not just list the house for sale, Jerry," Sarah explained, pointing at the screen with a manicured nail. "She transferred it. She used the general power of attorney to sign a quitclaim deed, transferring the property from Gerald Sullivan to Madison Sullivan Dunn for the sum of $10. She put the house in her name last Tuesday while you were getting your first round of chemo." I stared at the screen. There it was. My name signed by her as agent. She had stolen my home right out from under me before she even kicked me out. She wanted to make sure that when she sold it, the check would have her mine. "This is fraud," Sarah said, standing up and pacing the room. "This is clear self-dealing. A power of attorney has a fiduciary duty to act in the principal's best interest. Transferring a nearly $2 million asset to yourself for $10 while the principal is vulnerable is the definition of a breach of duty. We can nail her for this. I can file an emergency injunction right now. We can stop the sale." She reached for her desk phone, ready to call the courthouse. "Sit down, Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady. She looked at me confused. "Jerry, did you hear me? We can stop this. We can get a judge to freeze everything by this afternoon." "I know," I said, "but I do not want to stop it. Not yet." I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. I opened it to the back page where I kept the most important details of my life written down. I tore out a page and slid it across the desk to her. "Look at this," I said. Sarah picked up the paper. It was a summary of the estate planning I had done 5 years ago, right after Patricia died. I had never shown it to Madison because I wanted her to make her own way in the world without waiting for a handout. Sarah read the notes, and her eyes went wide. She looked from the paper to the screen and back again. A slow smile began to spread across her face, a smile that was not nice at all. "The Patricia Living Trust," she read aloud. "The house is not owned by Gerald Sullivan." "Exactly," I said, leaning back in the chair, feeling the first spark of genuine satisfaction I had felt in days. "The deed to the house was transferred into the Patricia Living Trust 5 years ago. I am the sole trustee. Madison is a beneficiary, but only upon my death." Sarah laughed, a short, sharp sound of triumph. She looked back at the screen. "That means the quitclaim deed she filed is worthless. She signed as agent for Gerald Sullivan, the individual. But Gerald Sullivan, the individual, does not own the house. The trust does. She cannot transfer what you do not technically own in your personal capacity. The title company will flag this the moment they run a full search for closing. They might, I said, or they might not. Madison is using that sketchy title company Brandon's friend runs. They cut corners. They might rush it through, especially if it is a cash deal and they are pushing for a quick close. But even if they do close, Sarah said, sitting back down, the sale will be invalid. The buyers will not get a clean title. And Madison will have committed a crime I finished for her. Sarah nodded, her lawyer brain catching up to my strategy. If we stop her now, it is a civil dispute. It is a messy family fight about fiduciary duty. She can claim she was confused. She can claim she thought she was doing what you wanted. A judge might just slap her wrist and void the transfer. But I continued, if she goes through with the sale, if she stands in that closing room, if she signs the final documents claiming she is the owner, and most importantly, if she takes that check. Grand larceny, Sarah whispered. Wire fraud, title fraud, elder financial abuse. If the value is over $100,000, which it definitely is, she is looking at a Class 1 felony. Mandatory prison time. I looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline. I built this life brick by brick, Sarah. I loved that girl more than anything. But she is not my daughter anymore. She is a predator. And you do not negotiate with predators. You trap them. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of admiration and sadness. She saw the pain behind my eyes. She knew that destroying my own child was going to break my heart, but she also knew it was the only way to survive. So what is the play? She asked, intertwining her fingers on the desk. Let them proceed, I said. Let them think they have gotten away with it. They are meeting the buyers tomorrow morning. I need you to find out where. I need you to contact the police, but tell them to wait. Tell them we are bringing them a case wrapped in a bow. I leaned forward, staring intensely at the young woman I considered more of a daughter than my own blood. Madison needs the money to pay off a loan shark by Friday. If she does not get that money, Brandon is a dead man walking. If she does get that money, she goes to prison. Either way, she loses. But I want to look her in the eye when the handcuffs go on. I want her to know that it was not bad luck that caught her. It was me. Sarah nodded slowly. She picked up her phone, but this time, instead of calling the civil clerk, she dialed a number from her private contact list. Detective Miller, she said into the receiver, her eyes locked on mine. This is Sarah Jenkins. I have a case for you. It involves major fraud against a senior citizen, and you are going to want to be there for the takedown. She listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece. He wants to know if the victim is willing to testify. I stood up, buttoning my coat. The fatigue was still there, but it was distant now, drowned out by the adrenaline of the hunt. Tell him the victim is dead, I said, walking toward the door. Tell him he is speaking to the witness for the prosecution. I walked out of the office, leaving the warmth behind. I had one more stop to make before the final showdown. I had to go back to the house. Not to beg, not to sleep, but to retrieve the one thing I had left behind in the wall of the basement. The one piece of evidence that would prove that this was not just greed. It was a conspiracy. Sarah was right. It was a trap. And Madison had just walked right into the center of it with a smile on her face. Tomorrow the steel jaws would snap shut. The taxi dropped me off 2 blocks away from my own home under the cover of a darkness that felt heavier than usual for a Chicago winter night. I pulled my collar up against the biting wind, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the temperature. I watched from the shadows of a neighbor's oak tree as Madison and Brandon pulled out of the driveway in her white Range Rover. They were dressed for a celebration, probably heading to some overpriced steakhouse to toast the sale of the property they had stolen. I waited until their taillights disappeared around the corner before I moved. I did not go to the front door, where the keypad would flash red and deny me entry again. Instead, I made my way around the side of the house, trudging through knee-deep snow that had not been shoveled. My breath plumed in the air before me as I reached the back patio. This was where I used to grill steaks on the 4th of July, where I taught Madison how to catch a baseball. Now it was just a frozen wasteland of memories. I knelt down near the foundation behind the large ceramic planter that held a dead frozen geranium. My knees cracked and popped, a painful reminder of my age and my illness, but I ignored it. I brushed away the snow and felt for a specific brick in the retaining wall. To anyone else, it looked like part of the mortar, but I knew better. I had laid this brick myself 30 years ago. I pushed on the left corner and it pivoted slightly, revealing a small, hollow space behind it. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a single brass key. It was the master key to the service entrance in the basement, a door that had not been opened in a decade. My hands were shaking as I slid the key into the lock, but it turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The door groaned as I pulled it open, and I slipped inside, closing it quickly behind me to shut out the howling wind. The silence of the basement enveloped me. It smelled of damp concrete and cedar, the same smell it had possessed for 30 years. I stood there for a moment in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. I was an intruder in the castle I had built. I moved quietly up the stairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked. I knew the anatomy of this house better than I knew the back of my own hand. I emerged into the kitchen, and the sight that greeted me made my stomach turn. The house was not just being sold, it was being gutted. Boxes were stacked everywhere. The paintings were gone from the walls, leaving behind pale, rectangular ghosts on the wallpaper. My favorite armchair was covered in plastic. The china cabinet was empty. They had worked fast, efficiently, erasing 40 years of history in less than 2 days. It was surgical and heartless. They were not just moving, they were fleeing. I walked through the living room, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug they had not yet rolled up. I headed straight for my study. This room had always been my sanctuary. It was where I drafted blueprints, where I balanced the books, where I sat and drank scotch when the weight of the world got too heavy. Now the mahogany desk was bare, stripped of my family photos and my antique lamp. But in the corner behind a heavy velvet curtain stood the safe. It was a Diebold floor model, a beast of steel and concrete that weighed half a ton. It was older than Madison. It did not have a digital keypad or a fingerprint scanner. It had a mechanical dial that required a delicate touch and patience, things neither my daughter nor her husband possessed. They were the generation of instant gratification. They probably looked at this relic and assumed it was empty or too much trouble to crack. I knelt before it. My fingers found the cold steel of the dial. Right 4 turns to 32. Left 3 turns to 10. Right 2 turns to 55. Left to 0. I felt the tumblers fall into place, a series of vibrations that traveled up my arm. I turned the handle and the heavy steel door swung open on silent hinges. The safe was not empty. Inside, stacked neatly, were the documents they thought were secure. They had used my safe to hide their secrets, assuming the old man would never get back in. I reached in and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I sat down on the floor, my back against the cold wall, and turned on the small flashlight I had brought with me. The first document I pulled out was a promissory note. It was not from a bank. It was handwritten on plain paper, but the terms were terrifyingly clear. Brandon Dunn acknowledges a debt of $500,000 to verify the account of Mr. Vargos. Vargos. That was the Turk's real name. The interest rate was astronomical, compounding weekly. I flipped through the attached pages. They were printouts of transaction logs from a cryptocurrency exchange. Brandon had not just lost money, he had incinerated it. He had leveraged everything, betting on coins that went to zero overnight. And then to chase his losses, he had borrowed from the kind of people who break legs for sport. I felt a surge of disgust, but no surprise. I had always known Brandon was a fool, but I never realized he was a suicidal one. I put those papers aside and pulled out the next stack. These were eviction notices. But not for this house. They were for Madison's real estate brokerage office downtown. Past due rent for 6 months. Final notice before lockout. There were also letters from the licensing board regarding complaints of commingling funds. My daughter, the successful realtor, was a fraud. Her business was a shell game, and it was collapsing around her ears. She wasn't selling my house to pay for my care. She wasn't even selling it just to pay Brandon's debt. She was selling it because she was broke, destitute. They were both drowning, and they had decided to use my life raft to save themselves. But the final item in the envelope was the one that made my blood run cold. It was a travel itinerary. 2 tickets on Air France. One way. Chicago O'Hare to Charles de Gaulle, Paris. Departure date Sunday night at 11:30 p.m. Sunday. That was 3 days from now. The plan became crystal clear in the beam of my flashlight. They were going to sell the house on Friday, get the cash wire transfer on Monday morning, and be on a plane before the check even cleared. They were going to take the money, leave me to rot in a state facility, and leave Brandon's loan shark hunting for a ghost. They were running. They were going to abandon everything, including me, to start a new life in Europe with my money. I sat there in the dark, clutching the tickets. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was malice. They were willing to destroy my entire existence just to escape the consequences of their own stupidity. They were going to leave me here alone, sick and homeless, while they drank champagne in Paris. I took out my phone and snapped photos of every document. The debt, the eviction, the tickets. I sent them immediately to Sarah's encrypted server. Then I carefully placed the papers back into the envelope and put it back in the safe. I closed the heavy door and spun the dial, locking their secrets away again. I wanted them to think they were still safe. I wanted them to walk into that closing meeting thinking they had won. I stood up, using the desk for support. My legs were trembling. I needed to get out. I needed to get back to the motel and rest before the final battle. I turned to leave the study, but suddenly headlights swept across the front window, illuminating the room in a blinding flash. The crunch of tires on the snow in the driveway was loud in the silence. I froze. They were back. Why were they back so early? It was barely 9 o'clock. I heard the garage door rumble open, then the sound of voices, not just 2 voices, 3. I moved to the window and peered through the slat of the blinds. Madison and Brandon were getting out of the car, but they were with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a long wool coat, and carrying a sleek leather portfolio. "We can show you the structure tonight," Madison was saying, her voice carrying through the cold air. "The lighting is actually better in the evening to see the finishes. We want to be ready for the signing tomorrow." They had brought the buyer's agent. They were doing a final walkthrough tonight. Panic seized my chest. I could not go back out the basement way. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, and that was exactly where they were heading. If I tried to run now, they would see me. And if Brandon saw me here, knowing what I knew about his debt to Vargos, he might do something desperate. A man who owes $500,000 to a loan shark is a dangerous animal. I heard the front door beep and unlock. "So this is the foyer," Madison said, her voice echoing in the hallway. High ceilings, original molding. I was trapped. The study was right off the living room. There was no other exit. I looked around frantically. My eyes landed on the closet in the corner. It was a small walk-in closet where I used to keep my winter coats and my old construction gear. It was the only place in the house they hadn't touched yet, because Madison thought it smelled like old dust and didn't want to ruin her manicure moving the heavy boxes. I scrambled across the room, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I pulled open the closet door and squeezed inside, pushing myself back behind a row of heavy wool coats that still smelled of my cologne and sawdust. I pulled the door shut just as the study door creaked open. "And this is the library," Madison said, flipping on the light switch. I held my breath, pressing my hand over my mouth, to stifle the sound of my own wheezing lungs. Through the thin slats of the closet door, I could see slices of light. I could hear their footsteps on the hardwood floor. "It is a beautiful space," the stranger said. "Very classic." "Yes," Brandon added, his voice nervous and tight. "We cleared out most of the old man's junk. The safe in the corner stays with the house, obviously. We do not have the combination, but a locksmith can crack it easily enough." I squeezed my eyes shut. They were standing 5 feet away from me, 5 feet away from the man they were trying to erase. If they opened this closet door, if they decided to show the agent the storage space, it was all over. I gripped the handle of a hammer I had left on the shelf years ago, my knuckles turning white. I was not going to let them take me without a fight. "Let's check the master bedroom next," Madison said. "The view of the garden is lovely." I waited. The seconds stretched into hours. Then I heard the footsteps retreat. The light clicked off. The door closed. I sagged against the wall of the closet, sweat dripping down my forehead, despite the freezing temperature. I was safe for now. But I was trapped in my own home, hiding like a criminal, while the real thieves gave a tour of their loot. I waited in the dark, listening to them move upstairs. I knew I had to wait until they left, or until they went to sleep. It was going to be a long night. But as I touched the cold steel of the hammer in my hand, I felt a grim resolve harden within me. Let them have their tour. Let them dream of Paris. Because tomorrow when they wake up, they are going to find out that the old man in the closet has a very long memory, and he is done playing nice. I pressed my back against the rough plaster wall of the closet and tried to will my heart to stop hammering against my ribs. The space was tight, filled with the smell of mothballs and old cedar, a scent that used to remind me of winter coats and holiday visits, but now smelled like a tomb. I was surrounded by the ghosts of my past heavy wool trenches I wore on job sites, flannel shirts from weekends at the lake, and a tuxedo I had not worn since Patricia's funeral. Through the thin wooden slats of the louvered door, I could see slices of the master bedroom. It was a room I had designed with my own hands, positioning the windows to catch the morning sun just the way my wife liked it. Now it was occupied by two people plotting my destruction. Madison and Brandon walked into the room, and I flinched as they tossed their heavy winter coats onto the bed. The mattress creaked, a familiar sound that felt like a violation. They did not sit down. They were too wired, too full of nervous energy. Brandon began to pace. I could see flashes of his expensive Italian loafers scuffing back and forth across the hardwood floor. He was wringing his hands, a gesture of weakness I had seen 1,000 times before, but never with such lethal stakes. "Are you sure about the signature, Maddie?" he asked, his voice trembling. It was high and thin, tight with panic. The agent at the title company looked at it for a long time. He held it up to the light. "If they run a verification against the deed on file, we are dead. You know what Vargos said. If I do not have the cash by noon on Monday, they are not just going to break my legs. They are going to put me in a boat and dump me in the Chicago River." I held my breath. Vargos. Hearing the name spoken aloud in my own bedroom made the danger real. These were not just bad financial decisions. These were life and death consequences brought into my sanctuary. Madison laughed. It was a sound that chilled me to the bone, not because it was evil, but because it was so utterly devoid of empathy. She sounded annoyed, like a mother tired of comforting a whining child. "Relax, Brandon," she said, and I could hear the click of her heels as she walked to the vanity. "The old man is senile. Did you see his hands shaking at the diner? He could barely hold the pen." I told the agent it was Parkinson's coupled with the chemo. They just want their commission. It is a cash deal closing in 48 hours. They are not going to look too hard at a messy signature when there is a $50,000 commission check waiting for them. But what if he talks Brandon pressed? What if he figures out what we are doing? He is sick, Maddie, but he is not stupid. He built this house. He knows people. He knows nobody, she snapped. Who is he going to call? His lawyer is dead. His friends are all in Florida or in the ground. I have his phone monitored. I have his bank accounts drained. He is powerless, Brandon. He is just a sick old man who is confused and scared. By the time he realizes what is happening, we will be over the Atlantic. I slowly reached into my pocket, my hand moving with the stealth of a soldier. I withdrew my phone. The screen was dim, but I could see the red button of the voice recorder app. I pressed it. The timer started counting up. 1 second, 2 seconds. I held the microphone close to the gap in the door slats. So what is the timeline exactly? Brandon asked, his pacing slowing down slightly as her confidence seemed to bolster him. We drop him at Sunset Haven tomorrow night, she said casually, as if discussing dropping off dry cleaning. I paid for 3 months up front with the cash I pulled from his savings account. It was the cheapest package they had shared. Room no private nurse. 3 months, Brandon repeated. And then what? Then nothing, she said. By the time the money runs out and the facility kicks him to the curb, we will be settling into the apartment in the Marais. We will be in Paris, Brandon drinking wine and forgetting this miserable winter. When the payments stop, Sunset Haven will make him a ward of the state. He will go into the indigent care system. He had a good life. He lived longer than most. Now it is our turn. We deserve this. We deserve to be happy without his dead weight dragging us down. I closed my eyes in the dark. A single tear leaked out, hot and angry, but I wiped it away instantly. My daughter, my flesh and blood. She was not just stealing my money. She was sentencing me to a slow, lonely death in a state-run warehouse just so she could live in luxury in France. The cruelty was so calculated, so casual, that it took my breath away. Whatever guilt I had felt about trapping them, whatever hesitation I had about sending my only child to prison, evaporated in that musty closet. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. They were not family anymore. They were targets. Brandon stopped pacing. I saw his shadow fall across the closet door. The recording was still running, capturing every damning word, but now my heart began to pound so hard I was sure they could hear it. I need to change my shirt, he said, his voice moving closer. I sweat through this one during the showing. I think your dad left some old button-downs in here. I saw a few hanging up when we did the clear-out. No, don't bother, Madison said from across the room. Just wait until we get to the hotel. I just want to get out of this wet shirt, Maddie. It stinks of fear and nervous sweat, he argued. I gripped the handle of the heavy framing hammer I had found on the shelf. It was cold steel wrapped in worn rubber. If he opened this door, if he saw me crouching here in the dark, I knew what would happen. Brandon was desperate. A desperate man facing a loan shark's deadline is capable of anything. If he found me, he would realize the game was up. He would realize I knew everything. And to save himself, he might try to silence me permanently. I shifted my weight, planting my feet. I prepared myself to swing. I was 73 years old and weakened by cancer, but I had swung hammers for 50 years. I would only get one shot. I saw the brass doorknob of the closet begin to turn. The latch clicked. The door moved a fraction of an inch. A thin beam of light widened across my face. I tightened my grip on the hammer, raising it slowly. I could hear his breathing on the other side of the wood. Suddenly, a loud chime echoed through the house. Bing bong! Brandon jumped, his hand flying off the doorknob as if it were red hot. What the hell was that? He yelped. Pizza, Madison said, her voice sounding bored. I ordered a deep dish. I am starving. Go get it. Brandon let out a long, shaky breath. He looked at the closet door one last time, hesitating. I held perfectly still, my muscles coiled like springs. Go get the food, Brandon, Madison commanded. I will find you a shirt from the donation pile in the garage later. Fine, he muttered. He turned and walked away. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hallway, then the sound of them descending the stairs. I let out a breath that shuddered through my entire body. I lowered the hammer. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I looked at the screen. The recording was still running. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 4 minutes that would put them away for 10 years. I waited until I heard the distant sound of the front door opening and the murmur of the delivery driver. I knew I had a window. A very small window while they were distracted by food and wine in the kitchen. I slipped the phone into my pocket. I pushed the closet door open silently. The room was empty. The bed was still piled with their coats. I moved like a ghost across the carpet. I did not go out the bedroom door. That was too risky. Instead, I went to the window that looked out over the flat roof of the sunroom. I unlatched the window. It was frozen shut with ice. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my chest. With a crack, the ice broke and the sash slid up. The wind howled instantly, biting at my face, but to me, it felt like freedom. I climbed out onto the snowy roof, closing the window behind me. I scrambled down the trellis, my old muscles screaming in protest, dropping into the deep snow of the backyard. I did not look back. I had the documents. I had the recording. And I had my life. I disappeared into the night, leaving them to enjoy their last meal in freedom. They thought they were celebrating a victory. They had no idea they were just fattening themselves up for the slaughter. And as I walked back toward the main road to find a taxi, I touched the phone in my pocket and smiled. "Enjoy the pizza, Madison," I whispered into the wind. "It is going to be the last good meal you have for a very long time." The sun rose over Chicago on Friday morning, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray that matched the dark circles under my eyes perfectly. I had not slept a wink in the motel bed, but I did not feel tired. I felt electric. The human body is a strange machine. It can be failing from cancer and crumbling from age, but give it a purpose, give it a target, and it will run on pure spite for days. I sat at the small wobbly desk in room 104 with a list of phone numbers and a plan that was going to turn the predator into the prey. Today was not about emotions. Today was about business. And business was something I understood better than anyone in my family ever gave me credit for. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the branch of a private bank on Michigan Avenue. This was not the bank Madison knew about. This was not the joint account she had drained or the savings fund she had pilfered. This was where I kept my Roth IRA and a separate investment portfolio I had started back in the 80s. It was money I had never touched at money. I had let compound quietly for decades, intending it to be a surprise inheritance for my grandchildren, or a safety net for a catastrophic event. Well, the catastrophe had arrived, and her name was Madison. The account manager looked at me with concern when I asked for a cashier's check drawn against the liquidation of the portfolio. It was a substantial sum, enough to buy a small island, but I did not flinch. I needed liquidity. I needed war chests. I told him it was for a real estate opportunity, which was not technically a lie. I was about to buy the most expensive piece of satisfaction in the world. When I walked out of that bank with the check folded in my inner pocket, I felt the weight of it against my chest like armor. I was no longer a destitute old man. I was a capitalist with capital, and I was ready to go shopping. My first call was to Frank Russo. Frank owns the commercial building downtown where Madison rents her fancy office suite. We go back 20 years to when I helped him pour the foundation for his first parking garage. Frank is a good man, but he is a businessman, and he has no patience for deadbeats. I knew from the papers I had found in the safe that Madison was 6 months behind on rent and facing eviction. To a landlord, a tenant who does not pay is like a termite eating away at the investment. Frank picked up on the second ring, sounding harassed. "Gerald," he boomed, his voice rough with smoke. "I have not heard from you since the diagnosis. How are you holding up?" "I am surviving, Frank," I said, watching the traffic speed by on the slushy street. "I am actually calling about business. I hear you have a problem tenant on the 4th floor. Sullivan Realty." Frank let out a groan that rumbled through the phone line. Do not get me started, Gerald. I know she is your daughter, but she is bleeding me dry. 6 months no rent. She keeps promising the check is in the mail. I am filing the eviction papers on Monday. I hate to do it to family, but I have bills too. Do not file on Monday. Frank, I said, my voice calm. Sell the lease to me. There was a silence on the line. What did you say? I want to buy out her lease, I explained. And I want to purchase the debt. Assign the arrears to me. I will pay you the full back rent today, plus a premium for the remaining term of the lease. You get your money immediately, no lawyers, no court dates. I become the landlord. I become the holder of the debt. Frank hesitated. Gerald, why would you do that? She is your kid. You want to bail her out. I watched a pigeon pecking at a frozen crust of bread on the sidewalk. Something like that, Frank. I want to handle it personally. Just send the assignment of debt agreement to my lawyer, Sarah. She will wire you the funds by noon. You are a saint, Gerald, Frank said, sounding relieved. A saint. Most fathers would let her sink. I will have the papers over in an hour. I hung up. A saint. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I was not saving her. I was buying the trap door she was standing on. Now I controlled her professional space. I could change the locks on her office, just like she changed the locks on my home. I could seize her computers, her files, her client list. I owned her career. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was Brandon. I made my way to Sarah's office. She was already waiting for me, her face pale but determined. She had the documents ready. This was the trickier part of the plan. Buying a debt from a legitimate landlord is easy. Buying a debt from a predatory lending agency that operates in the gray areas of the law requires finesse. The debt Brandon owed was held by a shell company called Apex Asset Recovery. It was the corporate front for Vargo's and his loan shark operation. They used it to wash their money and enforce their collections through the court system when breaking legs was too messy. Sarah made the call on speakerphone. She identified herself as representing an anonymous investor interested in purchasing a portfolio of high-risk distressed debt. She specifically inquired about the promissory note for Brandon Dunn. The voice on the other end was smooth, aggressive, and suspicious. Why would your client want that paper? The borrower is underwater. We are about to move to aggressive enforcement measures. That was code for physical violence. My client specializes in long-term recovery. Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. We know the borrower is insolvent. We know he has no assets in his name. If you move to enforcement, you get nothing but a jail sentence. My client is offering you 60 cents on the dollar. Cash. Today. You get $300,000 guaranteed instead of chasing a ghost for $500,000. There was a long pause. I could hear the man on the other end doing the math. To a shark, guaranteed meat is better than a potential feast that might fight back. They thought Brandon was broke. They thought he was a loser who was about to flee the country. Getting $300,000 back on a bad bet was a smart business move for them. Make it 70 cents, the voice said. Done, Sarah replied without hesitating. Send the transfer agreement. We sat in silence while the emails pinged back and forth. I watched the progress bar on the wire transfer screen. It moved agonizingly slow. This was the majority of my liquid cash. If this went wrong, I would be broke for real. But I did not care. Money is just a tool, and today I was using it to buy a sledgehammer. The confirmation flashed on the screen. Transfer complete. Ownership of the promissory note is assigned to the Patricia Living Trust. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. It was done. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city. The transformation was complete. Yesterday, I was just a father. I was a nuisance. I was a line item in their budget to be erased. Today, I was something else entirely. I was the landlord who held the keys to Madison's office. I was the creditor who held the note on Brandon's life. They owed me over $500,000. They owed me 6 months of rent. And legally, I had the right to demand immediate payment or seize every asset they possessed. They were walking into that closing tomorrow thinking they were about to get a check for $1.8 million. They had no idea that I was going to be the one cashing them out. I am not just their father anymore, I whispered to the glass reflection. I am their owner. Sarah came up beside me and handed me a thick file folder containing all the executed agreements. You know this is going to destroy them, Jerry, she said softly. Once we drop this on the table, there is no coming back. They will be ruined. They destroyed themselves, Sarah, I said, taking the file. I am just the one sweeping up the debris. I left her office and went back to the motel. I needed to prepare. I needed to shave. I needed to iron the one good suit I had managed to salvage from the trash bag. I wanted to look impeccable. As I was steaming the wrinkles out of my white shirt, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up. It was a text from Madison. Dad, remember to be at the lawyer's office tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Do not be late. And please try to clean yourself up. Wear something decent. We do not want you looking like a homeless person in front of the buyers. It is embarrassing. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, at the 11th hour, she was worried about appearances. She was worried about being embarrassed by the father she had robbed. She had no idea that the homeless person she was so ashamed of now owned the very ground she stood on. I typed my reply, slowly savoring every letter. I will wear my best suit, Madison. See you at 9. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the bed. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the motel room. The man looking back was old and tired, but his eyes were clear. They burned with a cold blue fire. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the lesson begins, and I was going to make sure they learned it well. The law offices of Sterling and Hightower were located on the top floor of the Hancock Center, offering a view of Chicago that usually cost $1,000 an hour to look at. The conference room was a cavern of glass and polished mahogany designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the double doors. It smelled of lemon polish and the kind of aggressive air conditioning that only rich people seem to enjoy in the middle of winter. Sitting on one side of the massive oval table were Dr. Stephen Evans and his pregnant wife, Rebecca. They were the perfect buyers, the kind of young, hopeful couple you see in insurance commercials. He was wearing a corduroy jacket with elbow patches, and she was nervously twisting a strand of hair, holding a protective hand over her baby bump. On the table between them sat a cashier's check for $1.8 million. It was a beautiful, terrifying piece of paper. It represented their entire future, their savings, and a massive mortgage they had likely stretched themselves thin to secure. They were smiling politely, unaware that they were sitting across from two vultures who were about to pick their bones clean. I knew Dr. Evans by reputation. He was a pediatric surgeon at Lurie Children's Hospital, a man who spent his days saving lives, while my son-in-law spent his days destroying his own. Watching them on the security feed Sarah had hacked into from her tablet in the hallway gave me a pang of guilt. They were innocent bystanders in this war. They thought they were buying a home to raise their child in a place with a garden and good schools. They had no idea they were buying a crime scene. But I comforted myself with the knowledge that I was about to save them from a legal nightmare that would have dragged on for years. On the other side of the table sat Madison and Brandon. They looked like royalty. Madison was wearing a structured black dress that screamed power and sophistication, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that showed off diamond earrings I knew she hadn't paid for. Brandon was in a custom gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked the part of the grieving, dutiful son-in-law, but if you looked closely, you could see the cracks in the porcelain. He was vibrating. His leg was bouncing under the table so hard it was making the water pitcher tremble. He kept shooting glances at the grandfather clock in the corner, checking the time against his Rolex every 30 seconds. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, masked as anticipation. The title agent, a man named Mr. Musson Henderson, who looked like he cut corners for a living, was shuffling papers, organizing the stack that would transfer my legacy into Madison's pocket. "We are just waiting for my father," Madison said, giving the buyers a tight, practiced smile. "He is a little slow these days. The medication, you know. It makes him confused about time." "Of course," Rebecca said, her voice full of sympathy. "We are in no rush. It is so hard to let go of a family home. We promise we will take good care of it. We love the garden." Madison nodded, her eyes cold. "Yes, well, he needs the money for his care. It is the best thing for him, really." Brandon leaned in, whispering something to Madison that the buyers couldn't hear, but I could imagine. He was probably asking if I was actually coming. He was probably doing the math in his head, calculating how fast he could get that check to the bank and wire the funds to Vargos before the sun set. He looked like a man who was holding his breath underwater, waiting to break the surface. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his upper lip where a sheen of sweat was forming, despite the chill in the room. "We are almost there, babe," he whispered, loud enough for the microphone in the room to pick up. "We are going to be rich. Just 10 more minutes." Rich. That word hung in the air like smoke. He didn't see a house. He didn't see a home. He saw a pile of chips on a poker table, and he was ready to cash out. At 9 o'clock, the heavy wooden doors remained closed. I let them wait. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted the anxiety to build in Brandon's chest until it felt like a heart attack. I wanted Madison to check her phone and wonder if her plan had failed. 9:01, 9:03. I adjusted my cufflinks in the hallway. I looked at my reflection in the glass panel. The man looking back was not the shivering invalid from the porch. The man looking back was Gerald Sullivan, the man who had stared down union bosses and mafia enforcers in the 80s. I was wearing an Armani suit I had bought 20 years ago, a classic charcoal wool that fit me a little looser now, but still carried the authority of a general's uniform. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My face was clean-shaven, the gray stubble gone, revealing the sharp jawline that Madison had inherited, but clearly did not respect. "Ready?" Sarah asked, standing beside me. She was holding a thick leather briefcase, the weapon that would end their lives as they knew them. Behind us stood 2 plainclothes detectives, Detectives Miller and Kowalski, looking like bored businessmen, but carrying badges that said otherwise. "Let's go to work," I said. "If you're still here, comment confront, so I know you're standing with me and staying to the end. And if this were you face to face with the people who betrayed you, would you stay silent? Or confront them and expose everything right now?" And a quick note. The next part of this story includes some fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If you'd rather not continue, this is the moment you can turn the video off. At 9:05 exactly, I pushed the double doors open. They swung inward with a heavy swoosh that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Evans looked up, expecting a frail old man with a cane. Instead, he saw me striding into the room with my back straight and my head held high. Madison's mouth fell open. She actually dropped her pen. She stared at me as if she were seeing a ghost. For a split second, she didn't recognize me. She was looking for the victim she had created, not the father she had feared growing up. Brandon stopped bouncing his leg. He froze, his eyes darting from me to the 2 large men standing behind me, blocking the exit. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. Dad, Madison stammered, standing up halfway and then sinking back into her chair. You are here." I did not answer her. I did not even look at her. I walked past her chair, my suit jacket brushing against her shoulder. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sudden sharp scent of fear. I walked to the head of the table where Mr. Henderson, the title agent, was sitting. He looked up, confused and intimidated by my presence. Excuse me, I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room without effort. You are in my seat. The agent scrambled up, gathering his papers, clutching them to his chest like a shield. Oh yes, Mr. Sullivan. Of course, we were waiting for you to sign the final disclosures. I sat down. I took a moment to unbutton my jacket and adjust my tie. I placed my hands on the mahogany table. My hands were steady, not a tremor, not a shake. I looked across the table at the young couple. Dr. Evans and Rebecca looked confused. They sensed the shift in the room, the sudden drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They looked from Madison's pale face to my calm demeanor and realized that the story they had been told was very different from the reality sitting before them. Dad, Madison hissed, leaning forward. Her voice was sharp, edging on hysteria. What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that? Just sign the papers so Dr. Evans can get the keys. We are on a tight schedule. She was trying to regain control, trying to bully me back into the role of the helpless senior. But her voice cracked. She saw Sarah standing by the door holding the file. She saw the detectives. Her brain was racing, trying to connect the dots, but the picture was too terrifying to accept. Brandon cleared his throat, a sound like dry leaves crushing. Yeah, Gerald. Let's just get this done. We have the car waiting downstairs to take you to the place. I slowly turned my head to look at Brandon. I held his gaze until he looked away, unable to bear the weight of it. There is no car, Brandon, I said softly, and there is no place. Then I turned my attention back to the buyers. I gave them a genuine, apologetic smile. Dr. Evans, Rebecca, I want to thank you for coming today. I apologize for wasting your time and for the deception you have been subjected to. Deception, Dr. Evans asked, his hand instinctively moving to cover the check on the table. Mr. Sullivan, I don't understand. Is there a problem with the inspection? Madison stood up, slamming her hand on the table. Dad, stop it! He is having an episode! She shouted to the room, desperate to drown me out. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is saying. Give me the pen. I have power of attorney. I will sign for him. She reached for the document, her hand clawing at the air. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked Dr. Evans in the eye and delivered the words that would shatter her world. I am sorry, doctor, I said, my voice calm and final, but this house is not for sale. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette down the hall. Not for sale, Madison whispered, her face contorting into a mask of pure rage. You can't do this. The deal is done. We have a contract. No, Madison, I said, turning to face her fully for the first time. You have a fraud. Up to all. And I am canceling the show. Sarah stepped forward before Madison could scream again, placing a heavy file folder onto the polished mahogany table with a thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. The room was so quiet that the sound echoed off the glass walls. She did not look at Madison or Brandon. She looked directly at Mr. Henderson, the title agent who was already sweating through his cheap suit. This is a certified copy of the deed for the property at 45 Dearborn Street, Sarah announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. As you can see, Mr. Henderson, the property was transferred into the Patricia Living Trust 5 years ago. The grantor was Gerald Sullivan. The sole trustee is Gerald Sullivan. She slid another document across the table. And this, she continued, is the quitclaim deed your agency prepared last week. It purports to transfer the property from Gerald Sullivan, the individual, to Madison Sullivan Dunn. However, Gerald Sullivan, the individual, had no title to transfer. The title was held by the trust. Therefore, this document is void ab initio. It is legally worthless. And since you failed to perform a basic title search, which would have revealed the trust existence, you are looking at a gross negligence suit that will likely cost you your license. Mr. Henderson turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for corpses. He looked at the papers, his hands shaking so badly he could not even pick them up. But Madison said, he stammered. She said she had power of attorney. Sarah laughed, a short, sharp sound. A power of attorney cannot be used to transfer assets out of a trust that the agent does not control. And more importantly, take a look at the signature on your deed. She pointed to the jagged, shaky scrawl on the fraudulent document and then laid a canceled check from 5 years ago next to it. The difference was undeniable. One was the writing of a man pretending to be weak. The other was the bold, confident stroke of a builder. That signature is a forgery, Sarah said, and using a forged document to facilitate a real estate transaction of this magnitude constitutes wire fraud and grand larceny. Dr. Evans stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. He looked at the cashier's check on the table as if it were contaminated. He grabbed it, his knuckles white. "I think we have seen enough," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Mr. Sullivan, I am deeply sorry. We had no idea." He turned to Madison, who was sitting frozen in her chair, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he spat at her. "You wasted our time. You wasted our emotional energy. And you tried to make us accomplices to a crime. My lawyer will be contacting you regarding the inspection fees and the legal costs we incurred. Do not ever contact us again." "Come on, Rebecca," he said, guiding his wife toward the door. "Let's get out of here." They walked out, leaving a vacuum of silence in their wake. The check, the $1.8 million lifeline, was gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound was like a prison cell locking. Madison stared at the empty space where the money had been. The reality crashed down on her all at once. The Paris apartment, the escape plan, the new life. It all evaporated in seconds. She turned to me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "You are crazy!" she screamed, jumping up from her chair. Her composure was gone, replaced by the feral desperation of a trapped animal. "You are insane! Do you know what you just did? You just killed us!" She pointed a shaking finger at Brandon, who had slumped down in his chair, his eyes wide and unseeing. "He needs that money," she shrieked. "He owes people, Dad, bad people. If he does not pay them by Monday, they are going to kill him. Do you understand? You just signed his death warrant." I sat there unmoved by her hysterics. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt, watching her unravel. "I know," I said calmly. She froze. You know I know about the crypto, Madison," I said. "I know about the gambling. I know about the $500,000 he borrowed from Vargos and the Apex Asset Recovery Group." Brandon let out a whimper. It was a pathetic sound. He looked at me, terror flooding his eyes. How do you know Vargos?" I reached into my briefcase. I did not hurry. I let them wait. I let the fear marinate. I pulled out the thick file folder I had secured yesterday. I opened it and extracted the promissory note, the one with the aggressive interest rates and the violent clauses. I slid it down the long table. It stopped right in front of Brandon. "Is this the debt you are worried about?" I asked. Brandon looked down at the paper. He recognized it instantly. "Yes," he whispered, tears starting to stream down his face. "They are going to break my legs, Gerald. They are going to kill me." "No, they are not," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because you do not owe Vargos anymore." I tapped the paper with my index finger. "I bought the note," I said simply. The room went silent again. Madison looked from the paper to me, her brain struggling to process the shift in power. What do you mean you bought it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I mean I am the holder of the debt," I explained. "I paid Vargos off this morning. He was quite happy to take 70 cents on the dollar for a bad loan. He assigned all rights of collection to the Patricia Living Trust." I looked Brandon dead in the eye. You do not owe the loan shark anymore, Brandon. You owe me. You owe me $500,000 plus interest and penalties. And unlike Vargos, who might just break your legs, I have lawyers who will strip you of every asset you will ever own for the rest of your life. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And since the terms of this note state that the full amount is due immediately upon demand, I am demanding it. Pay me. Now. Brandon looked like he was going to vomit. He shook his head slowly. I don't have it, Gerald. You know I don't have it. That is why we were selling the house. I know, I said, cold and unyielding. Which brings me to you, Madison. I turned my gaze to my daughter. She was trembling, leaning against the table for support. She looked small now, stripped of her arrogance. You were counting on your business to keep you afloat once you got to Paris, right? I asked. You thought you could run your real estate empire remotely. I pulled another document from my briefcase. The lease assignment from Frank Russo. Well, that is going to be difficult, I continued, because you don't have an office anymore. I tossed the lease agreement onto the table next to the debt note. I bought the building, I said. Or at least I bought your lease and your arrears. I am your new landlord, Madison, and you are 6 months behind on rent. She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. No. Dad, please. I exercised my right as the property owner this morning, I said, ignoring her tears. I changed the locks on your office an hour ago. Your computers, your files, your client lists, they are all locked inside. And they will stay there until you pay every cent of the back rent you owe, which we both know you cannot do. I stood up slowly, towering over them. So let's recap, I said, my voice booming in the quiet room. You have no house, you have no buyer, you have no office, you have no career, and you owe me $500,000. Brandon let out a low moan and slid out of his chair, collapsing onto the floor. He didn't faint, he just gave up. He curled into a ball, burying his face in his hands, sobbing like a child. Madison stood there, staring at me with a look of absolute horror. She realized finally that the father she had underestimated, the old man she thought was weak, had just systematically dismantled her entire life in less than 10 minutes. Why, she whispered, why would you do this? We are your family. Family. I repeated the word, tasting bitter. Family does not lock their father out in the snow. Family does not steal their father's home. Family does not wish for their father to die in a warehouse so they can go to Paris. I buttoned my jacket. You wanted to put me in the trash, Madison, I said. You wanted to discard me like I was garbage. I looked down at her, at the ruin of the woman I had raised. But you forgot one thing about me. I started my life cleaning up construction sites. I started my life hauling debris. I leaned in close so she could see the fire in my eyes. I am a garbage man, Madison, and I have been cleaning up trash my whole life. I straightened up and looked toward the door where Detectives Miller and Kowalski were waiting. I gave them a curt nod. Officers, I said, pointing to my daughter and her husband. These are the individuals who forged my signature and committed wire fraud. You have the evidence. Take them away. Madison screamed as the detectives moved in handcuffs, gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. But her scream sounded far away. I turned my back on them and walked toward the window, looking out at the city I had helped build. The storm was over. The cleanup had begun. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut is a unique sound. It is mechanical, cold, and final. In that opulent conference room with the view of the city I helped build it, rang out louder than any scream. Detective Miller was professional but firm as he pulled Brandon's arms behind his back. Brandon did not fight. He was a puddle of a man, destroyed not by violence, but by the weight of his own consequences. He sobbed openly, his face pressed against the mahogany table where he had thought he would become a millionaire. Madison was a different story. When Detective Kowalski took hold of her arm, the shock wore off, and the denial set in. She began to thrash her heels, slipping on the plush carpet. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this. This is a misunderstanding. My father will explain. Dad, tell them. Tell them I was just trying to help you." She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. The mask of the shark was gone, leaving behind the face of the child I had raised, the child I had pushed on swing sets and tucked into bed. For a fleeting second, my heart lurched. It is a biological reflex to protect your offspring, no matter how monstrous they become. But then I remembered the cold. I remembered the porch. I remembered the trash bag hitting my chest, and the laughter I imagined them sharing while I walked in the snow. "Dad, please," she cried, tears ruining her perfect makeup. "I am your daughter. I am Madison. You cannot let them take me to jail." I walked over to where she stood. I looked her up and down, seeing not the little girl in pigtails, but the woman who had planned to abandon me in a state warehouse. "I am sorry, madam," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "But you must be mistaken." Madison froze, her mouth hanging open. "My daughter died 2 nights ago," I said, looking straight into her soul. "She died the moment she locked her sick father out in a blizzard to freeze. You are just the stranger who moved into her corpse to steal my money." I turned away. I did not watch them drag her out. I heard her wailing echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors dinged and swallowed the sound. I stood alone in the conference room with Sarah. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It was the silence of a job finished. The silence of a site cleared of debris ready for new construction. The legal process that followed was swift and brutal. With the evidence I had gathered, the recording from the closet, the forged documents, the paper trail of the debts, it was an open and shut case. The district attorney did not offer a plea deal. He saw what I saw: a predatory couple preying on a vulnerable senior citizen. Brandon was sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and conspiracy. He cried when the gavel came down. I was there in the back row watching. I felt nothing. He had gambled with his life, and he had lost. Madison fared no better. She avoided significant jail time by turning state's evidence against some of her shady business associates, but the cost was her life as she knew it. The licensing board stripped her of her real estate license permanently. She was blacklisted from every financial institution in the state. Her reputation was incinerated. She went from being a high-flying broker to a pariah. As for the debt, I did not forgive it. I enforced it. I had my lawyers liquidate every asset Brandon and Madison had left. The Range Rover was repossessed. Her designer clothes were sold at auction. Their furniture, their electronics, everything went under the hammer. I stripped them down to the studs. When the dust settled and the accounts were balanced, I had recovered a significant sum. It was blood money in a way extracted from the ruin of my own family. I could not spend it on myself. It felt tainted. So I did what Patricia would have wanted. I took every penny of the interest and penalties I collected from Brandon's debt, and I established the Patricia Sullivan Scholarship Fund. It provides full tuition for trade schools for young men and women who want to build things, who want to work with their hands and create value rather than stealing it. I turned Brandon's greed into a future for kids who actually deserved a chance. I also sold the house on Dearborn Street. I did not sell it to Dr. Evans. He found another place, and I wished him well. I put it on the open market and sold it to a nice family with 3 kids and a golden retriever. I walked through the empty rooms one last time before handing over the keys. I touched the fireplace I had built. I stood in the kitchen where I had read that hateful note. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would mourn the loss of the home I had shared with my wife. But I realized that a house is just wood and brick. A home is where you have peace. And there was no peace for me there anymore. The memories had been poisoned. It was time to demolish the past and build something new. I moved to a condo on Lakeshore Drive. It is on the 35th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. It has a doorman named James who greets me by name every morning. It has 24-hour security. No one can get to my door unless I buzz them in. It is a fortress of solitude and comfort. I sit here now on my balcony wrapped in a warm cashmere blanket. The wind off the lake is cold, but it cannot touch me. I have a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea in my hand, the kind Patricia used to drink. The steam rises curling into the gray sky. My phone is sitting on the small glass table next to me. It has been vibrating intermittently for the past hour. I glance at the screen. Incoming call. Cook County Detention Center. It rings and rings, then stops, then rings again. I look at the notification badge. 49 missed calls. 49 times Madison has tried to reach me from the public phone in the holding area, or perhaps from a halfway house phone now that she is out on probation and realizing that the world is a very cold place when you have no money and no father to bail you out. I can imagine what she wants to say. She wants to apologize. She wants to explain. She wants money. She wants to ask how I could do this to her. She wants to play the victim one last time. I reach out and pick up the phone. For a second, my thumb hovers over the answer button. It would be so easy to slide it across, to hear her voice, to let her back in just a little bit. But then I look at my hand, the hand that held the pen she tried to force me to sign with, the hand that wrote 2 words on her car window in the snow. Wrong move. I press the side button, silencing the ringer. I place the phone face down on the table. I do not block the number. That would be an act of emotion. That would show that I care. Ignoring it is an act of power. It tells her that she simply does not exist in my world anymore. She is a ghost haunting a frequency I no longer tune into. I take a sip of my tea. It is hot and sweet. The warmth spreads through my chest, chasing away the last lingering chill of that terrible night on the porch. I am 73 years old. I have cancer, but it is in remission. I have money in the bank. I have a view of the city I love, and for the first time in a long time, I have absolute silence. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, listening to the wind whip around the building. I am not lonely. I am free. They tried to throw me away. They tried to tell me my place was in the trash. But they learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the man who built the foundation you are standing on. Because if he wants to, he can pull it out from under you and watch you fall. I smile to myself, a small private smile of victory. I cleaned up the mess. I balanced the books. And I survived. It was without a doubt the best move of my life. The seasons in Chicago change with a violence that rivals the city's politics. The brutal winter that had served as the backdrop for my betrayal finally broke, giving way to a wet, gray spring and then a sudden, humid summer. It has been 6 months since I sat in that conference room and dismantled my daughter's life. 6 months since I moved into the condo on Lakeshore Drive. People often ask me, usually in hushed tones over dinner or coffee, if I have regrets. They wonder how a father can sleep at night, knowing his only child is sitting in a cell wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of designer silk. I tell them I sleep just fine. In fact, I sleep better than I have in years. I was standing in the center of a large open workspace in the West Loop, a renovated warehouse that smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. This was the new headquarters of the Patricia Sullivan Trade Initiative. Around me, 20 young men and women were busy at work learning how to frame walls, how to wire circuits, how to sweat copper pipes. They were the kind of kids society usually overlooks. Kids from rough neighborhoods, kids who didn't have the money for college, kids who reminded me of myself 50 years ago. "Mr. Sullivan," a voice called out. I turned to see Marcus, a 19-year-old from the South Side, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He had been one of our first scholarship recipients. He was sharp, hard-working, and possessed a gratitude that my own daughter had never known. I just wanted to show you the wiring on the mock-up panel, he said, beaming. I think I finally nailed the three-way switch circuit. I walked over and inspected his work. The wires were stripped cleanly. The connections were tight. The layout was logical and neat. It was professional. Good work, Marcus, I said, patting him on the shoulder. You have good hands. Respect the trade and it will feed you for life. He grinned. Thank you, sir. I wanted to say thank you again. For everything. My mom, she cried when I told her I got my certification last week. She said you are an angel. I chuckled, shaking my head. I am no angel, son. I am just a man who knows the value of hard work. As Marcus went back to his station, I saw Sarah Jenkins walking across the shop floor. She was wearing a light summer suit, her heels clicking on the concrete. She looked serious. Sarah rarely brought me good news when she had that expression on her face. I walked to meet her in the quiet of the small glass-walled office overlooking the training floor. What is it, Sarah? I asked, pouring 2 cups of water from the cooler. Is it the appeal? She nodded, taking the cup. Madison's public defender filed another motion for early release based on hardship. She claims the conditions in the facility are detrimental to her mental health. She says she is suffering from depression and anxiety because of the estrangement from her family. I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. 6 months ago, that might have stung. Now it just felt like reading a weather report about a storm in another country. Estrangement, I repeated dryly. That is a fancy word for consequences. What did the judge say? Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile. Judge Harrison threw it out. He noted that her anxiety did not seem to prevent her from running a Ponzi scheme or defrauding a cancer patient. She stays in Jerry. She serves the full 30 months. 30 months. 2.5 years. It seemed like a long time and no time at all. And Brandon, I asked. He is not doing as well, Sarah said. Federal prison is not a country club, despite what people think. He has been assigned to the laundry detail. Apparently, he is not very popular. He tries to gamble with cigarettes and ramen noodles. He has already lost his commissary privileges twice. Old habits die hard. I looked out at the students on the floor. I saw Marcus laughing with another student as they measured a piece of drywall. They were building a future. Brandon was still trying to hustle in a cage. There is something else, Sarah said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a white envelope. It was standard-issue prison stationery. The stamp was crooked. The handwriting was familiar but shaky, stripped of the arrogant loops it used to have. It arrived at my office this morning, Sarah said softly. She knows you block her calls. She knows you return her letters unopened. So she sent it to me asking me to deliver it. I stared at the envelope. Madison Sullivan, inmate, number 78492. You do not have to read it, Jerry, Sarah said. I can shred it right now. You owe her nothing. I took the envelope. The paper felt cheap and rough against my fingertips. No, I said. I think I will read this one. I waited until I was back in my condo that evening to open it. I sat on my balcony, the city lights reflecting off the black water of Lake Michigan below. I had a glass of scotch in my hand, a 15-year-old single malt that I had bought to celebrate my remission scan coming back clean last week. I was healthy. I was wealthy. I was free. I slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. Dear Dad, I hope this letter finds you well. I know you are angry. I know I messed up. I have had a lot of time to think in here, Dad. Too much time. The nights are so loud. I can't sleep. I wanted to tell you that I am sorry. I really am. I should not have listened to Brandon. He pushed me, Dad. He told me it was the only way. I was scared. I was scared of losing everything, and I made terrible choices. But Dad, please, you have to understand. I am your daughter. I am all you have left. Do you really want me to rot in here? The other women? They are animals. I am scared every single day. I heard you started a scholarship fund. I heard you gave away hundreds of thousands of dollars to strangers. Strangers. Dad. While your own daughter sits in here without even enough money to buy shampoo at the commissary. How does that look? How can you play the philanthropist while I am suffering? Please, Dad. I am not asking you to get me out. I know you won't do that. But please just put some money on my books. Just enough so I can live like a human being. I promise I will pay you back when I get out. I have ideas, Dad. I can start over. We can start over. Don't you miss me? Don't you miss the holidays? Who is going to take care of you when the cancer comes back? Because it will come back, Dad. And when it does, you are going to need family. You are going to need me. Love, Maddie. I lowered the letter. I looked at the handwriting, the frantic scrawl of a narcissist who still hadn't learned the most basic lesson of all. There was no remorse in those words. Not really. She blamed Brandon. She blamed the other inmates. She blamed me for spending my money on strangers. She even tried to weaponize my cancer against me, threatening me with the fear of dying alone. She didn't miss me. She missed my wallet. She missed the shield my money provided against the harsh reality of the world. I took a sip of scotch. The liquid was warm and smooth. She asked who would take care of me. I thought of Sarah, who handled my affairs with integrity and love. I thought of Marcus, who looked at me with genuine respect. I thought of the family who bought my old house, who sent me a Christmas card with a picture of their kids playing in front of the fireplace I built. I was not alone. I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what they could take from me. I stood up and walked to the railing. The wind whipped at the paper in my hand. I did not burn the letter. Burning it would be dramatic. Burning it would imply that it had the power to hurt me. Instead, I walked back inside to my kitchen. I opened the drawer where I kept my household files. I pulled out a folder labeled Past Liabilities. It was the folder where I kept the copies of the eviction notices, the court judgments, the restraining orders. I slipped the letter inside. It was just another receipt, another record of a debt that had been canceled. I picked up my phone. I dialed Sarah's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Jerry, did you read it?" "I did," I said, my voice calm and light. "And do you want to send a reply?" "No," I said. No reply, but Sarah, I want to make an adjustment to the scholarship fund. "Oh, what kind of adjustment?" "I want to expand it," I said, looking out at the city lights. "Next year, let's double the intake. I want to add a program for financial literacy. I want to teach these kids how to manage their money, how to protect their assets, and how to spot a bad investment." "That sounds like a great idea, Jerry," Sarah said, warmth returning to her voice. "A very wise legacy." And Sarah, "Yes, if another letter comes from the facility, don't bring it to me. Just file it with the others. I have too much work to do to spend time reading fiction." I hung up the phone. I walked back out to the balcony. Below me, the city was alive. Millions of people rushing, fighting, loving, and building. Somewhere down there in a concrete cell, my daughter was waiting for a savior who wasn't coming. She was waiting for the old Gerald, the one who could be manipulated by tears and guilt. But that man was gone. He had died on a frozen porch in February. The man who remained was stronger. He was a builder. And for the first time in his life, he was building something that no one could ever steal from him. He was building peace. I finished my drink and set the glass down. The night air was sweet. I am Gerald Sullivan. I am 74 years old, and my life is just beginning. And to you listening to this story, remember this. I didn't become strong overnight. I became aware. God didn't remove the pain from my life, but God gave me the courage to face it without lying to myself. And when everything collapsed, God reminded me that truth still has power, even when family doesn't. This family story isn't meant to glorify anger. It's meant to expose silence. I stayed quiet too long. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted peace. Don't be like me. Learn from this family story before it becomes your reality. Love does not mean surrendering your dignity. Many will call this dad revenge, but they misunderstand. This dad revenge wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about stopping the damage. If you ever find yourself trapped in a situation like this, dad revenge, remember protecting yourself is not cruelty, it's survival. I've had time to reflect. I pray with humility now, not pride. God doesn't ask us to suffer endlessly to prove loyalty. God asks us to walk in truth. This family story taught me that forgiveness can exist without reconciliation, and peace sometimes requires distance. If this dad revenge made you think, leave a comment and share what lesson you took from it. If you believe stories like this can help others, consider sharing and subscribing. It allows these messages to reach the people who need them most. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And a final warning, future stories may include fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If that's not what you're looking for, feel free to exit and choose content better suited to you.